Last month with Chris Davis, we had a few more, and this time even a few more. It's just fantastic. We're going in the right direction. As I these events, they're free. The idea is that we want a place where people can come once a month, last Wednesday of each month, where they can listen to all manner of interesting people from all different walks of life, different professions, different areas of expertise. So last month we had Chris Davis, a breathwork specialist. It's fantastic for those who were here last month. Next month we've got Mike, aka the endurance physio. So he's quite a renowned physiotherapist, lots of triathlete coaching and all sorts of stuff. So he's here next week, so that'll be fantastic. This is a relatively small thing. We hope we can grow it each month, so we do need everybody's help, just where they can, promote it. The difficult thing with when you mention well-being, mental health, all these kind of things, is getting the right guys through the door as well. So we need people's help to be able to get the guys who may be isolated, who do a bit of community, who do learning more, come to these sessions. So please, with your help, bit of promotion, bit of word of mouth, and get these sessions a bit more busy each month. So we're currently running our 6th Strength and Wellbeing course, which is going great. And again, if you know people who might be interested in lifting some weights, learning more about looking after their body, learning more about looking after their head, just send them our way. We run our Strength and Wellbeing course every few months, 8-week course, each session 2 hours. First session in the gym, second hour is our wellbeing workshops, combining sort of physical and mental health. We learn all sorts from depression, anxiety, management, sleep, lots of other stuff too. For those of you here last time to sit down, Chris Davis, the breathwork facilitator, he was really keen on setting up a breathwork session for us. So I'm hoping within the next few months we can get a date off him, probably weekend slot, and we can set up a free breathwork session. So if anyone's interested in learning a bit more about breathwork and participating, actually doing it in a session with him, we've got some venues we can use. Get on the card. So if anyone's interested, let us know. So I mentioned our walk, Chaz. Go for it. Right, so got a few quite adventurous people here as well. So myself and Chaz, we are not endurance or adventure athletes, ultra runners. But on the 1st of June, we're going to raise a bit of awareness, hopefully a bit of money for Stand Tall, so we can keep doing what we're doing for free for as many people as we can. So walking from Cardiff Bay, the Celtic Ring, right by Cardiff Bay, to Penavan, and back in 48 hours. It's about 135k. And we did a challenge last year where we went from Penavan to Snowdon over 4 days, and that was horrendous. We had all our kit with us. We had about 20 kilos at least each, carrying our tent and our food and water and stuff. Chaz's feet, your feet still got neuropathy on them?
No, so back to
normal. Yeah, so
good time to do it again.
Yeah, our feet were an absolute mess. It was awful, but it was a great walk to do. So we thought this year we'd do something that's not 4 days. Because the family and that.
So we do the equivalent of what we did in 4 days, but in 2 days.
Yeah, so we've got less kit to carry, it's more local. So if anyone wants to help out, walk a few miles, tag along, just maybe share it. The money we raise goes straight to running our Strength and Wellbeing course. We're hoping to start running some running sessions and coaching sessions. We're running coach, we know. We've been running some self-defense sessions as well. Neil, he was but the backup instructor. We've had some really fantastic sessions with him. Yeah, so it's all about getting active and just getting the right people to our sessions. People who are lonely, who are isolated, people who benefit from what we're on. Please help spread the word. And without further ado, and I'll stop talking, because I like to talk, and I will keep talking. We'll welcome Will Fraser-Coombe. So he has on his podcast a few months back now. Yeah, fantastic guy. I'm sure you can more about it. I will hand it over to Will.
Thank you. Right, guys. My name's Will. I'm the founder of the Adventure Athletes. I run a podcast and a coaching business, and a lot of the podcast guests are here today. So thank you for coming, guys. Super nervous about today. I've never done anything like this before. So if I pull out my phone halfway, I'm not texting and calling a cab. I am just trying to get my notes up. Okay. So a bit of a trigger warning before we start. I am going to be talking quite graphically about suicide and homelessness. As you can tell, I'm getting a bit emotional already. I've never spoken about this before. rope around my neck, I start to question what got me to this point. As I slump down into the makeshift noose that's tied to my bedroom door using a series of climbing knots, I start to fade out, but I start to feel control. It wasn't as drastic as in the movies. No sudden jolt as I kick a chair from beneath me, no flailing around, just a slow descent as I slowly fade to blackness. I didn't want to die. I was indifferent, numb, lost. I wanted to see if I could do it more than anything. I was curious to see if I was in a place where my self-preservation didn't exist anymore. It's quite a dark place you have to get to where your survival instinct just completely disappears. And to my curiosity, I was in that place. With ease, I slid my body into that rope, slowly fading to black as my brain became depleted of oxygen. My last thought was, so this is what death feels like. If you had known me a year prior to this, you wouldn't have assumed that I'd have ever gotten to this point. I was building up my mental strength and resilience through parkour. I'd been training parkour for about 10 years, and I followed the old school training mentality brought about by the Yamakasi, the guys that started the sport in the first place. And it was brought about by a French style of military training. They had this saying, "Être fort pour être utile," be strong to be useful. It's something that resonated with me so much so that I got it tattooed on my arm, along with the birthplace of the sport. This completely changed my outlook on life when I started training parkour. I went from this shy kid that couldn't even talk to the ice cream man to someone that could go out and eventually travel the world, competing internationally and staying with strangers, to now having random people that I've never met before come to my house on a weekly basis to talk about random stuff on my podcast. Eventually, this training led me to the fire service. I joined the fire service in 2018, and I was in there for a good few years before having to give it up, as we'll talk about in a bit. Doubling down on my strengths in the fire service, I've really worked on my mental strength and my physical resilience. I trained really hard to the point where I could turn up to anything and just compete at a good level. So it started off with being able to climb up mountains in full fire kit, carrying 20 kilos of water as I'm going up the fires to beat out mountains. These are some of the examples of ones that we went to. We was up there for hours on end with what essentially is a floppy shovel. We basically get given a stick with a bit of rubber on the end, and we're just smashing out this fire for hours through day and night. I entered my first strongman competition and I won my weight category. And then 2 weeks after that, I managed to enter an ultra marathon, 50 kilometers, and I finished it without any prior training. I wasn't a runner. I didn't do any strongman events before. I just was in a point where I could turn up and compete and do fairly well. Then 2020 came about, and it changed the lives of many people, and mine was no different. I was living with someone that suffered with cystic fibrosis, a rare respiratory disease that made him extremely vulnerable to COVID. At first, we'd decided that he was going to move in with his family, and I was going to pay extra into the bills. So I was going to be working 100-hour weeks in the fire service so I could pay extra into the bills while he lived with his family. And I was going to go out, buy food for him and drop it off at his house so then he could still live. We'd decided this way in advance before we knew lockdown was coming to the UK. But then when it did eventually come, on a Thursday night, he said, "I don't want to have to move out of my own home because of you. I want you out by the weekend." And he gave me a choice. He said, "I can either move out or I can quit my job as a firefighter." Now, to me, this wasn't even a choice. There was no way I was giving up being a firefighter. I'd done all this training and I'd followed the motto of being strong to be useful. So how could I give up on my community in this time of need? But it didn't make it any easier. I still felt betrayed and abandoned by someone that was meant to be one of my best friends. But this was my purpose. So I took to the streets that night didn't even wait till the weekend, and I slept on a park bench. For the next few weeks, I slept on the streets, wondering how I was ever going to find somewhere to live again. Until eventually, one of the guys on the fire station found me, and they put out a plea on Facebook asking for any help to get me somewhere to live. But during the pandemic, no one was letting people stay with them, and there was no one renting either, so I was just stuck. Until eventually, someone on the fire service, a lot higher up than me, decided to give me a chance and said that I could sleep on the fire station. We pulled some chairs together that I couldn't even really fit on. When I was lying down, my feet were hanging over the edge, and if I moved too much, I would just roll off completely. Some nights just like abandoning myself to sleep on the floor. But it was something. My manager brought me a sleeping bag and a pillow, so I had somewhere to stay and a little bit of comfort. And the guys would bring me food and wash my clothes for me because I had no basic facilities to do anything for myself. That first night was quite rough. I remember lying down, trying to get to sleep. I just couldn't. But the one thing I did have was access to a gym, which most people weren't lucky enough to have at the time. So I headed into the gym and I spent 3 hours training just to try and clear my head. Didn't sleep much that night. My first rude awakening happened within the first week, where the fire bells dropped as I was in a deep sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was dazed and confused, and if you've never heard the fire bells go off in person, you have no idea how terrifying that is. Within 5 minutes, everyone from the fire crew rushed onto station, putting their kit on and heading out to the fire, while I'm just laying there dazed and confused as to what's going on. I wasn't on shift, so I didn't have to go to the fire. It took me a few hours before I managed to get back to sleep, and within minutes of me getting back to sleep, they'd returned to station and woke me up again. After a fire call, you don't just put your stuff away and leave. You have to clean the truck, you have to sort all the safety gear out, you have to fill out paperwork. So it took a few hours before they left. A lot of them, it being 4 a.m, they've just been on a fire for 2 hours. They just wanted to sit down and have a cup of tea. So yeah, I really didn't get much sleep that night. A few months went by of living like this before restrictions started to ease, and I finally found somewhere that I could live. I finally found a home. I had nothing in it. I just had a blow-up mat and the sleeping bag and the pillow that my manager had given me. And at the grace of the fire service, I was given a week off to sort of recoup, de-stress, and get my new place together. Now, a normal person might have spent that week getting some furniture, decorating their house, but me being me, I decided to cycle 100 miles to go on a climbing trip to Dartmoor with my friends, since my whole world had basically been engrossed in the fire service for such a long period of time. I just really wanted to get away. While I was away climbing, I took a fall. I fell about 12 foot onto a loose boulder, and as I landed, managed to find my feet. The boulder shifted its weight beneath me and it snapped my ankle completely in half. I didn't know it was broken at the time, so I just tried taping it up and I tried walking off. Now, that didn't exactly work. I couldn't put any weight on it at all, and was over 100 miles from home at this point and a mile away from the car. But again, this was another test of my resilience to me. I told myself, what good is all the training that I've done if I've not been able to get myself out of a situation like this? What would I have done if I was on my own? Or what would I have done if I was on a fire call? Would I have just given up and accepted help? So I decided to not let my friends help me. For that mile back to the car on like really uneven ground on fire tracks, I decided to try and hop. And when I couldn't hop, I decided to crawl on all fours, cutting my hands and knees up in the process. But I knew one thing, and that's that I was getting back all on my own. We eventually got back to the car, and my friend took me to the hospital. Now, if you've seen pictures of me before, you would know that you will never see a picture of me looking like this again. I've never been in so much pain in my life. Straight from the hospital, being told that I was sentenced to 6 to 12 months in a cast, non-weight bearing, having to use crutches. The first thing I thought was, how am I going to get to the gym? So straight from the fire station. My mum picked me up from the hospital, took me to the fire station, and I used the gym. And within an hour of me working out, my manager rocked up on station, had a massive go at me, and told me that I'm banned from the station apart from on drill nights. Now, on drill nights, my manager would let me come in and see the crew, but he kept a careful eye on me to make sure I wasn't going in the gym and training. But at home, I was tying resistance bands to my radiator while I'm sitting on a chair so I can still do leg extensions, doing push-ups and pull-ups, and just training every single day. And this worked out for a while. I was telling myself that I was training for the day that I got out of that cast. This was when the second lockdown kicked in. So I wasn't allowed to go to station anymore. No one was allowed to visit me and come and look after me. So that house that I'd got, which became a sense of freedom in the first place, then turned into a bit of a prison in my mind. I was alone and I was still training. I was trying to stay strong through this whole thing, but on the inside, the cracks were really starting to show. This was the hardest year of my life. 6 months into my recovery, the doctors had told me that I was healing really well and I was probably going to make a full recovery. The breaking point came when they said, you should do couch to 5K. That's going to get you back to some physical activity. And I just thought to myself, I've done an ultra marathon without training. How the fuck is couch to 5K going to help me? But I tried it. I tried that first kilometre run where you walk, run for a little bit and walk. And I didn't even get 500 metres down the road before I had to limp home in pain. I didn't know what happened. I'd become this really strong and resilient person to not being able to push myself for a kilometre run. That was the point where I tried to kill myself. As I faded to black, my last thought was, so this is what death feels like. I don't know how long I was unconscious for. It was a good few minutes. I was right on the edge of not coming back. That's when I started convulsing. A deep, violent shake that brought me back to consciousness. It allowed me to find my feet on the floor, just long enough to pull the rope from around my neck and catch my breath, before I lay there crying on the floor for a few hours. I didn't tell anyone about this. I just carried on as if everything was normal. I tried telling myself that everything was normal and that it was just a weak moment. So a couple of weeks later, on my birthday, testing positive for COVID, so I couldn't go out anywhere, but I was out of my cast, I decided to set myself another challenge. That had got me through dark times in the past. I decided to do 1,000 pull-ups in a day. Again, something else that I'd not trained for. I set a timer. I did 3 pull-ups on the minute, every minute, for 6 hours, not taking any break to eat or to go to the toilet. My only breaks were in that small gap of time between getting off the bar and having to get back on when my alarm went off. Over the next 2 years, I relied on this challenge. I told myself that I can still do it. I've still got it in me. I've proved it to myself by doing these pull-ups. Those 1,000 pull-ups that tore my arms apart and made it so I couldn't lift my arms above my head. I've still got that side to me. Why do I have to prove it again? And while I rehab my ankle for the next 2 years, I didn't push myself at all. I fell back into a depression, and it was one that I didn't even know I was going through. But I didn't push myself, and I was making bad decisions financially, socially, and emotionally. I was in a really dark place. I then started getting into stoicism, and I read a quote about Hercules. Without the lion, hydra, stag or boar, and wicked and brutal men to test his strength and abilities, the world would not have known Hercules. And the message was, what challenges are going to define you? I started reading more about Hercules, and I read about his 12 labours. 12 incredibly hard challenges set to task Hercules into redemption. This wasn't a thing about his ego. He was atoning for previous misdeeds. And there was a deeper philosophical meaning behind it. It was about taming your ego, seeking enlightenment, and trying to make a difference within yourself to benefit the world around you. It follows the Greek idea of pathos, which is going through virtuous struggle in order to create a difference in the world. This is something that I'd been searching for again. The thing that was lacking the last time after trying to commit suicide was having that reason to train, not just doing it for my own ego, but to do it to help the people around me. The story is an allegorical reflection of the human journey to self-realization, and that all relies on the people around you. This was the moment I decided to set myself 12 challenges to follow along with Hercules' journey. Now, I started it by writing down a list of 12 challenges, just 12 of the hardest things that I'd never thought I'd be able to do, but it would take me along a journey and would change my life for the better. The first one being the Welsh 3000s. Now, I had no idea how hard this was going to be. My friend had tried it, it failed before, he wanted to try it again, and I was in this place now mentally where I was trying to help other people, so I said I'd join in. I said we'd do it together. I hadn't really climbed any mountains before. I'd been up Snowdon once, I'd been up Pen y Fan a couple of times, but I had no idea just how physically grueling the Welsh 3000s would be. If you don't know, the Welsh 3000s are the 15 tallest mountains in Wales, and you have to do them in under 24 hours. With this lack of experience, I took to the mountains without any waterproofs, just complete misjudgment on my end. We started hiking at 4 a.m. after camping out the night before, and it was absolutely hammering it down. I was frozen to the core while everyone else was nice and dry and cozy. I caught hypothermia before even reaching the start line, because you start on the summit of Snowdon. We sat there for about an hour trying to warm myself up before we headed off. We started to tick off more and more mountains, and after we started heading towards the fourth one, I was feeling good. We got to the base of the fourth one, and I looked up and realised how much I'd fucked up. It felt like my quads were ripping off my bone up that mountain, and I was really starting to experience the fatigue that had got me through the hypothermia. I called it there. I'd never given up on anything before. Whenever I'd set myself a challenge, I'd seen it through. So this was a massive hit to me mentally. For the next 3 months, I lived with even more depression, feeling like a failure, thinking that I'd never be able to get back to the person I was before. But in the back of my mind, this is what the journey was about. I looked back over my 12 labours, and I realised I should probably get training this time. I shouldn't just turn up. I set myself 12 weeks to train for my next one. I started shaving my head every day as a sign of discipline and to get me into the routine of training again. Within this time, I was so confident that I was going to be able to do it that I started my brand, The Adventure Athletes. This is a brand that's based around helping others and setting and overachieving in your own goals in your own life. And we do everything to help you with that. We'll do coaching plans, we'll set up events, online events, and we've got a podcast to hear stories from those that have done the same thing. My next challenge was a big one. I decided I wanted to walk across the Brecon Beacons 50 miles completely barefoot. Now, I probably should have trained more for this, but I did do a little bit of training. My feet definitely weren't as conditioned as I thought they were, but we got moving. At the start, I was meant to be meeting my family and a few friends who were going to be acting as a support crew, helping transport food to different points along the journey and parking my car up so I had somewhere to sleep on the night shift. This didn't exactly work out as planned. Their support car broke down and I started all on my own. I parked up and I started getting that doubt in my head again. What if I failed? For the next 6 hours, I started running and walking across the Brecon Beacons. Mostly, it was grass at the start, so it was actually feeling pretty good, and I was pretty hopeful that I was going to finish. But as it started to get dark and my support crew got nearer, the terrain started to change. I was doing a lot of concrete, a lot of fire roads, and heading into the woodlands. I went into a pretty dark place to get through this. I started thinking about my friends that had died a few years prior and how they'd never get the chance to do things like this. I wanted to make them proud, and I didn't want to let them down. I didn't want to go back to the place that I was before. But eventually I made it. There was lots of things that went wrong during that attempt. My ankle swelled up again because I hadn't trained enough. I could barely walk at points, and there were so many points I wanted to give up, but I made it. I started to feel like myself again. After that, things started to build in momentum. I went back and completed the Welsh 3000s in 17 hours and 24 minutes, and I did a side challenge it's called the 496 challenge, where you run 1 kilometre corresponding with the day of the month. So on the last day of the month, you're running 31 kilometres, and in total, you would have covered 496 kilometres in 1 month. I was running my podcast and talking to the most incredible people, but there was something still missing. I was still depressed, and I was still struggling to build connection in my life. That's when I reached out to BigMoose, a mental health charity in Cardiff that supply therapy for those in need completely for free. I learned a lot of tools that helped me through my mental health journey, from developing a strong why that's not based around my own self-gratification and ego, tracking things around in my daily life that could impact my mental health, like my sleep, my nutrition, how things made me feel, and how I felt the days following. I learned about my own self-talk and how the thoughts that I'm telling myself, I would never say to someone else. A lot of what I do is in coaching. And if any of the people that I coach came up to me and gave me their problem, if I responded in the way that I was responding to myself, like, there's no way they'd be working with me. It's something I really struggled with. I started making time for myself. One thing that I do is every time I'm out on a run now and I see a random park bench, I have to sit on it and just take 5 minutes. Most of the time before I sit on that bench, I don't want to run. I'm not a big runner. I actually hate running, to be honest, but I always try and get out. They say it's good for you. So I never want to get out that door. After I find a bench and I sit on it and I try and think about why that bench was put there and the reasons for the memorial benches that are scattered around everywhere, I start to appreciate the freedom that running gives me. Afterwards, there's a fire lit in my belly. The thing that I realised I was missing was community. Even though I was running this podcast with amazing people, there were things that I still weren't asking them. I was trying to get information out of them, trying to think, what do people want to know about? Asking them questions and not really building a connection. The biggest thing that I learned about was vulnerability. I demonstrated this on day 26 of my 496 challenge. I had to run 26 kilometers that day. But in the days prior, because I hadn't trained enough yet again, I turned up and I'd had a stress fracture in my foot. I got 3 kilometers into my run and I could barely walk, but I kept pushing through. Each day of my 496 challenge, I would film a little Instagram video just to share with the world, share my thoughts. On this day, I could not stop crying. Every time I turned that camera on, the tears just rushed from my face. It was almost like an on button for the tears. It took me 20 minutes to record that video, eventually convincing myself to just post it through the tears and share the vulnerability that I'm doing. This was a challenge that I was doing to raise money for BigMoose after they'd helped me out. And it was something that meant a lot to me, to try and get people to be vulnerable themselves to seek out the help. How could I not share my vulnerability? From that, I'd learned a lot. Lots of people started to reach out, not just to congratulate me and to encourage me, but to ask if they could be part of the challenge, ask if they could donate. So far in my fundraising, I've raised £800, which has potentially got 2 people through a full course of therapy and saved their lives. I've made countless friends through doing this, and I'm starting to build bigger connections with the guests on my podcast. What's happening next is I'm carrying on with my 12 labours challenge. I've got 2 down, so I've got 10 more to go. The one I'm doing this year is I'm aiming to flip a 100 kilo tyre until I've reached the distance of a marathon. My biggest challenge yet. You'll be glad to know though that I have started training for this one already. What's that? It's going for a world record. The world record is the greatest distance covered flipping a tyre in 24 hours. But even if I don't get that record, I'm going to keep going until I've reached the marathon. The current record is currently 11 kilometers. So I'm just trying to times it by 4 essentially. Vulnerability has taught me a lot of things. It's helped me build a lot of connections and share my story. It's brought me here to talk to you guys today. Like I said, I've got a lot more challenges to go and I'm still learning every single day. So this is just the start of my journey. I am raising money for fundraising money for BigMoose. So if you want to know more, just feel free to grab me and we'll have a chat about it. And if you want to know about any more of my labours, feel free. If you've got any tips on any of them, I could really do with the help because I am clueless. But that's my story. Thank you for listening to me today, guys.
Where could people
Yeah.
find? Oh, sorry.